I held the wedding invitation in my trembling hands, staring at the empty space where father of the bride should have been written, and I knew that my $30 million inheritance was about to destroy the only family I had left. My name is Matthew Lewis, and at 69 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at me. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Sitting in my penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay in Miami, surrounded by the fortune I had spent decades building, I realized that money, all of it, meant absolutely nothing when your own daughter looks at you with the kind of hatred I had only seen in the eyes of my business enemies. The morning it all began was typical for South Florida in October, humid, with that golden sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Coral Gables office. I had just finished a conference call with my lawyers about expanding my real estate portfolio when my assistant, Maria, knocked on the door with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Lewis," she said in her soft Colombian accent, "your daughter Sarah is here. She looks upset." Sarah. My beautiful, stubborn, brilliant daughter who hadn't spoken to me in 3 months. Not since the incident with her fiancé, James. Not since I had done what any father would do to protect his child, even if she couldn't see it that way. "Send her in," I said, straightening my tie and trying to prepare myself for another confrontation. When Sarah walked through that mahogany door, I barely recognized her. Gone was the confident investment banker who had inherited my sharp business instincts. In her place stood a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days, her usually perfect blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her designer clothes wrinkled. But it was her eyes that hit me like a punch to the gut. They were red from crying, yes, but worse than that, they were empty. Like she had already mourned something that hadn't died yet. "Dad," she said, and even that single word carried the weight of years of disappointment. "Sarah, sweetheart, you look. Don't." She held up her hand, and I saw it was shaking. "Just, don't. I'm not here for small talk or for you to critique my appearance. I'm here because despite everything you've done, despite how much you've hurt me, you're still my father. And I can't get married without telling you myself." The wedding invitation appeared in her hands like a magic trick, crisp and elegant with gold embossing. Tiffany & Company stationery. I had taught her to appreciate the finer things in life, even if she now resented me for it. "James and I are getting married in 6 weeks," she said, placing the invitation on my desk but not pushing it toward me. "The ceremony will be at the Vizcaya Museum and Gardens. Small, intimate. Just family and close friends." I picked up the invitation, my heart racing with hope. Maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch. Maybe. "Before you get any ideas," Sarah continued, her voice growing colder, "you're not invited." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest tighten, the way it had during my heart attack 5 years earlier. "Sarah, please." "No, Dad. You made your choice when you decided to investigate James like he was some kind of criminal. When you hired that private investigator to follow him around Miami like he was planning to rob a bank instead of marry your daughter. When you showed up at his office at Goldman Sachs and basically accused him of being a gold digger in front of his colleagues. I was protecting you." The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. "Do you have any idea how many people have tried to use you to get to my money over the years? How many so-called friends disappeared the moment they realized you wouldn't give them access to the Lewis fortune? James isn't one of them," she screamed back, and suddenly we weren't in my elegant office anymore, we were just a father and daughter, both bleeding from wounds we had inflicted on each other. "He doesn't even know about the inheritance. He thinks you're just some moderately successful real estate investor, not whatever it is you've really become." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean he doesn't know?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I never told him, Dad. I never told him about the $30 million you've been dangling over my head my entire adult life. I never told him about the trust fund, or the properties, or any of it. Because I wanted someone to love me for me, not for what I might inherit someday." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic on US 1, the occasional horn from a boat in the bay, the normal sounds of Miami life continuing while my world crumbled. You told me you were leaving everything to me, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I was. I am. But not anymore. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with hands that were no longer shaking. I've decided to change the inheritance. All of it. The money, the properties, the businesses, everything goes to charity when I die. The University of Miami Medical Research, the Miami-Dade homeless shelters, the hurricane relief funds. Places where it can actually do some good instead of destroying families. Sarah, you don't understand what you're saying. That money could secure your future, your children's futures. What children, Dad? Her voice broke on the words. What future? You've made sure I can't trust anyone who gets close to me. You've made sure I question every relationship, every friendship, every moment of happiness because I'm always wondering if they're just after the money. Well, congratulations. Problem solved. There won't be any money. She was at the door before I could form a response, her hand on the handle. Sarah, wait. Please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we? She turned back, and for just a moment, I saw the little girl who used to sit on my lap in this very office, playing with my calculator while I worked on weekends after her mother died. I loved you, Dad. More than anyone or anything in this world. But you chose money over me. You chose suspicion over trust. You chose being right over being happy. So now you can have exactly what you wanted, all the money in the world, and no one to share it with. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at that wedding invitation. My name was nowhere on it. In the space where proud parents usually announce their daughter's marriage, there was just James's parents' names. Dr. and Mrs. Richard Morrison cordially invite you to celebrate the marriage of their son James to Sarah Elizabeth Lewis. Sarah Elizabeth Lewis. She was keeping my name, but erasing me from her life. That night, I called my lawyer, Robert Chen, who had been handling my affairs for 15 years. When I told him what Sarah had said about changing the inheritance, he was quiet for a long moment. Matthew, he said finally, you do realize that legally, she can't change your will. The inheritance is yours to distribute as you see fit. But she's my only heir. If something happened to me tomorrow, then everything would go to her whether she wants it or not, unless you change your will first. I hung up the phone and poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, the same scotch my father used to drink when he was working late in his study. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man who had built an empire from nothing, who could buy and sell most of Miami, and I couldn't even buy my daughter's forgiveness. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to attend that wedding whether Sarah wanted me there or not. Before we continue with this emotional journey, if you're finding this story as gripping as I hope, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramatic stories. And don't forget to leave a comment below telling us what city you're listening from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. The decision to crash Sarah's wedding didn't happen overnight. It festered in my mind for 3 days, growing stronger each time I walked past the framed photos in my penthouse hallway, pictures of Sarah at her high school graduation, at her college ceremony at Duke University, at her first day working for Morgan Stanley in their Miami office. But it was the photo from her 21st birthday that stopped me cold every time. We were at Joe's Stone Crab on South Beach, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember now. Her mother's emerald necklace glittered around Sarah's neck, the same necklace I had planned to give her on her wedding day. That's when I realized I needed to understand what had gone so wrong. How had protecting my daughter turned into destroying our relationship. I called Tommy Restrepo, the private investigator I'd hired to look into James Morrison. Tommy ran a small but efficient agency out of a strip mall in Kendall, and despite his unimpressive office location, he was the best in Miami at digging up information without leaving fingerprints. Mr. Lewis, Tommy's gravelly voice came through my phone. I was wondering when you'd call. Heard through the grapevine that your daughter wasn't too happy about our little investigation. That's putting it mildly, Tommy. She's cutting me out of her wedding. Hell, she's cutting me out of her life. I poured myself another scotch, even though it wasn't even noon. I need you to tell me everything again. Every detail about James Morrison. Maybe I missed something. Tommy's office smelled like Cuban coffee and disappointment. The walls were covered with certificates and photos of Tommy with various Miami politicians and police chiefs, back when he was still a detective with Miami-Dade PD. Now he spent his days following cheating spouses and investigating insurance fraud, but he was still the sharpest investigator I knew. "Look, Mr. Lewis," Tommy said, spreading the Morrison file across his cluttered desk, "I'm gonna be straight with you. This kid is clean. Squeaky clean. Born and raised in Coral Springs, parents are both doctors, went to University of Florida on academic scholarships, Harvard MBA, started at Goldman Sachs 2 years ago. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. What about his finances? Modest. He's got about $40,000 in student loans, drives a Honda Civic, lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brickell. Splits dinner checks with your daughter, pays his taxes on time, even volunteers at the Miami Rescue Mission on weekends." I stared at the surveillance photos Tommy had taken. James leaving his office building, James at the gym, James buying groceries at Publix. He looked like exactly what he was, a clean-cut, hard-working young man who had fallen in love with my daughter. So why did I feel like I needed to investigate him in the first place? I asked, more to myself than to Tommy. Tommy leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "Can I be honest with you, Mr. Lewis? In my professional opinion, you were looking for problems that weren't there. This Morrison kid, he's not after your money. Hell, based on what I observed, he doesn't even know you have money." "What do you mean?" "I followed them on dates for 2 months. Casual restaurants, movies, walks on the beach. The kid always insists on paying, even though it's obvious your daughter makes more money than he does. And when they talk about the future, about marriage, about kids, never once did I hear him ask about family money or inheritance or anything like that." The photos suddenly felt heavy in my hands. Here was evidence of my daughter's happiness, and I had been treating it like a criminal investigation. "There's something else," Tommy continued, pulling out a small digital recorder. "I recorded this conversation between James and his buddy from work. They were at Flanagan's in Aventura, having beers after a company softball game. He pressed play, and I heard James's voice, slightly muffled by background noise. "Dude, I'm telling you, Sarah's dad hates me. Like, really hates me." "Why? What did you do?" "Nothing. That's what's so crazy. I've been nothing but respectful. I always ask permission before taking Sarah out of town. I bring flowers when I pick her up. I even tried to bond with him over golf, but he looks at me like I'm planning to rob his house or something. Maybe he's just protective. You know how fathers are with daughters. It's more than that, man. Sarah thinks her dad might have hired someone to investigate me. Can you believe that? Like I'm some kind of criminal or con artist or something. It's insane. What are you gonna do?" "What can I do? I love Sarah more than anything. If her dad wants to treat me like a suspect, I'll deal with it. But it's killing Sarah, you know? She's caught in the middle between the father she adores and the guy she wants to marry." Tommy clicked off the recorder. "That was recorded 3 weeks before you showed up at his office and basically accused him of being a gold digger." I felt sick. Jesus, Tommy. What have I done? You want my honest opinion? You've been rich for so long, you've forgotten what it looks like when someone genuinely doesn't care about your money. This kid was willing to put up with your suspicion and hostility because he loves your daughter. And you threw it back in his face. I left Tommy's office with a full report that proved beyond any doubt that James Morrison was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man who loved my daughter. But that knowledge only made everything worse, because it meant Sarah was right. I had chosen suspicion over trust. I had let $30 million poison the most important relationship in my life. That evening, I drove to Sarah's condo in downtown Miami. It was a modest 2-bedroom on the 15th floor of a glass tower, nothing flashy despite the trust fund I'd set up for her that she rarely touched. I had bought the unit for her as a graduation gift, but now I wondered if even that gesture had felt like a cage to her. The doorman, Luis, knew me by sight. "Good evening, Mr. Lewis. Miss Sarah expecting you?" "No, Luis." "Is she home?" He glanced at the elevator, then back at me. "She came home about an hour ago. But, sir, if you don't mind me saying, she looked pretty upset when she walked through here." I took the elevator up, my heart pounding harder with each floor. What was I going to say? How do you apologize for letting fear and money destroy the most precious thing in your life? I knocked on her door softly. "Sarah?" "It's Dad." No answer. I knocked again. "Sweetheart, please. I know you don't want to see me, but we need to talk." The door opened, but only as far as the security chain would allow. Through the crack, I could see Sarah's face, puffy from crying. "What do you want, Dad?" "I want to apologize. I want to explain. I want—" "There's nothing to explain. You made it clear where your priorities are. Sarah, please. Just 5 minutes. Let me come in, and I'll tell you everything. About the investigation, about why I did it, about how sorry I am." She stared at me for a long moment, and I held my breath. "5 minutes," she said finally, closing the door to remove the chain before opening it fully. Her living room was exactly what I'd expect from Sarah: clean lines, books everywhere, a few carefully chosen pieces of art. But what caught my attention were the wedding magazines scattered across the coffee table, and the tissue box that was clearly getting heavy use. "I saw Tommy Restrepo today," I began. Sarah's face went white. "You're still investigating James? Even now?" "No. No, Sarah, that's not. I went to see the file. To understand what I had done wrong. To see if maybe I had overreacted." She sat down heavily on her couch, and I noticed she was still wearing her engagement ring, a simple solitaire that James had clearly chosen with care, not ostentation. "And what did you discover, Dad? That your daughter's fiancé isn't actually a criminal mastermind?" The sarcasm in her voice cut deep, but I deserved it. "I discovered that you're right about everything. James is a good man. A man who loves you for exactly who you are. A man who is willing to put up with a suspicious, paranoid father-in-law because he wanted to marry you that badly." Sarah looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Then why, Dad? Why did you do it? Why did you have to poison everything?" And there it was, the question I'd been dreading, because answering it honestly would mean admitting the ugly truth about what $30 million had done to my soul. I sat down across from Sarah, my hands trembling as I tried to find the words that had been buried inside me for years. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled only by the distant sounds of Miami traffic and the hum of her air conditioning. "You want to know why I did it?" I said finally. "You want to know why I destroyed the best thing in your life because I was terrified of losing you?" Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue, but she didn't look away from me. "I'm listening." I took a deep breath, tasting the salt air that drifted in from her balcony. "It started with your mother." "Mom? Dad, what does Mom have to do with James?" Everything, sweetheart. Everything. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Your mother didn't marry me for love, Sarah. She married me for money. The words hung in the air like a confession at trial. Sarah's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger. That's not true. Mom loved you. I remember. You remember what a 7-year-old girl was supposed to see, I interrupted gently. But I lived the reality. Your mother, beautiful, elegant Catherine, came from a family that had lost everything in the recession of '91. Her father's construction business went bankrupt, they lost their house in Pinecrest, and suddenly this debutante from one of Miami's oldest families was working as a hostess at the Forge to help pay her parents' bills. I could see Sarah's world shifting, the foundation of her childhood memories cracking. When I met her at a charity gala in '92, I was already successful, but nothing like what I became later. I had maybe $2 million in assets, a small real estate company, big dreams but modest means by today's standards. And Catherine. God, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Sophisticated, cultured, everything I thought I wanted. Dad, please don't. She played the part perfectly, Sarah. The loving girlfriend, then fiancée, then wife. But I started noticing things after you were born. How she always steered conversations toward business deals and investments. How she encouraged me to take bigger risks, make more money. How her affection seemed to correlate directly with the size of my latest acquisition. I stood up and walked to Sarah's window, looking out at the glittering lights of downtown Miami. My reflection stared back at me, an old man telling his daughter that her entire childhood was built on a lie. The final proof came when you were 6 years old. I had been suspicious for months, so I hired a private investigator, different guy than Tommy, retired FBI agent named Martinez. He found out that your mother had been having an affair for 3 years. Dad, stop. I don't want to hear this. With her personal trainer, Marcus. Some 25-year-old kid from Hialeah with abs you could bounce quarters off of. I turned back to face her, seeing my own pain reflected in her eyes. But here's the thing that destroyed me, Sarah. When Martinez confronted her with the evidence, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry or apologize or beg for forgiveness. You know what she said? Sarah was crying now, but she shook her head. She said, Matthew's boring and getting old, but he's rich. Marcus is exciting and young, but he's broke. I need both of them to be happy. Like I was just a financial instrument. A means to an end. Why didn't you divorce her? Because of you. I sat back down, reaching across the space between us but stopping short of touching her hand. I loved you more than anything in the world, and I knew that a custody battle would destroy you. So I made a deal with the devil. Catherine could have her trainer, her affairs, whatever she wanted, as long as she played the role of loving wife and mother in public. As long as she never made you feel unwanted or unloved. That's why she was always traveling, Sarah said quietly, the pieces falling into place. All those girls' trips to New York and LA. Most of them were with Marcus. I paid for everything, his apartment in South Beach, their vacations, even his stupid attempt at starting a fitness studio in Coconut Grove. I bought your mother's love for you, Sarah. I literally paid her to be a good mother. The room felt smaller suddenly, filled with the weight of secrets that had been festering for decades. She died in that car accident when you were 14, I continued, my voice breaking. But you know what the worst part was? I felt relieved. Not because she was gone, but because I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to keep paying someone to love my daughter. Sarah was sobbing now, her perfect composure completely shattered. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because I need you to understand what that did to me. What it did to my ability to trust anyone who came near you. After Catherine died, every friend you brought home, every boy you dated, every person who showed interest in our family, I saw them all through the lens of what your mother had taught me. That love can be bought, that affection has a price, that everyone wants something. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo from her Sweet 16 party at the Fontainebleau. Remember this girl, Jessica Martinez? Your best friend junior year of high school? Of course. We lost touch when she moved to Orlando for college. She didn't move to Orlando, Sarah. Her family moved because I paid them $50,000 to relocate after I found out Jessica was reporting back to her mother about our family finances. Her mother was passing information to investors who were trying to find ways to undercut my real estate deals. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. You're lying. I wish I was. I have the bank records, the private investigator reports, everything. Your best friend was literally being paid to spy on you. What about David? My boyfriend's senior year? David Chen. His family owned 3 restaurants in Aventura. They were facing foreclosure, and David's father approached me at a school fundraiser asking for a loan. When I refused, David suddenly became very interested in dating you. When I had him investigated, I found text messages between him and his father discussing ways to get closer to the Lewis money. Each revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. I watched my daughter's faith in human nature crumble in real time, and I hated myself for being the one wielding the hammer. College wasn't any better, I continued relentlessly. Your roommate freshman year, Rebecca, was feeding information about you to a tabloid blogger. Your sorority sister, Amanda, tried to get you to invest in her brother's cryptocurrency scheme. Even your study group, half of them were just trying to get invitations to our house in the Gables so they could network with the other wealthy families. Stop, Sarah whispered. Please stop. I can't stop, sweetheart. Because you need to understand that by the time James Morrison walked into your life, I had spent 23 years watching people use you to get to me. 23 years of discovering that every friend, every boyfriend, every relationship you thought was real had some ulterior motive connected to our money. I knelt down in front of her couch, taking her hands in mine. They were ice cold. So when this clean-cut young man from Goldman Sachs started dating my daughter, when he was charming and respectful and said all the right things, my first instinct wasn't to be happy for you. It was to find out what he really wanted. Because in my experience, Sarah, everyone wants something. But James didn't know about the money, she said through her tears. You heard Tommy's recording. He had no idea. That just made me more suspicious. I thought maybe he was smarter than the others, playing a longer game. Maybe he was waiting until after the wedding to reveal his true intentions. Sarah pulled her hands away from mine and stood up abruptly. So you decided to destroy my happiness based on your paranoid assumptions? I decided to protect you the only way I knew how. I stood up too, my voice rising. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch your child's heart get broken over and over again by people who are just using them? Do you know what it's like to be powerless to stop it because the money that's supposed to make life easier actually makes it infinitely more complicated? So you made the decision for me. You decided I wasn't capable of judging people for myself. Because every time you did judge for yourself, you got it wrong. The words escaped before I could stop them, and I saw them hit Sarah like a slap. Get out, she said quietly. Sarah, I didn't mean. Get out, she screamed. Get out of my house, get out of my life, and get out of my wedding. I never want to see you again. I walked to her door, then turned back one last time. I love you, Sarah. Everything I did because I love you more than my own life. If this is what your love looks like, Dad, then I don't want it. The door slammed behind me with a finality that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. As I waited for the elevator, I could hear Sarah crying through the door, deep, wrenching sobs that tore at my heart. But I had made my decision. If Sarah wouldn't listen to reason, if she wouldn't accept my protection, then I would have to protect her in spite of herself. I was going to crash that wedding, and I was going to expose James Morrison for whatever he really was, even if it meant Sarah would hate me forever. Because losing her love was better than watching her repeat my mistakes. The next 4 weeks passed like a fever dream. I threw myself into work with an obsession that worried even Maria, my assistant who had seen me through countless business crises over the years. I was closing deals, making investments, expanding my portfolio with the manic energy of a man who had nothing left to lose. But every night, I would sit in my study with a glass of Macallan, staring at the wedding invitation that I had framed, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of what I was fighting for. October 15, 2023. Vizcaya Museum and Gardens. 4 p.m. ceremony. I had the date and time burned into my memory. 3 weeks before the wedding, I hired a new private investigator. Not Tommy, he had made it clear he thought I was making a mistake. This time I went with Patricia Gonzalez, a former FBI profiler who specialized in financial crimes and long-term deception cases. Mr. Lewis, Patricia said during our meeting at her upscale office in Aventura, I've reviewed the Morrison file from your previous investigator, and I have to agree with his assessment. This young man appears to be exactly what he seems. Appears to be, I repeated, leaning forward. That's the key phrase, isn't it? The best con artists are the ones who appear genuine. Patricia, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with prematurely gray hair, studied me carefully. What specifically are you hoping to find that wasn't discovered in the previous investigation? I want you to go deeper. Family history, college relationships, work connections. I want to know about every woman he's ever dated, every friend he's ever had, every financial transaction he's made since he turned 18. Someone that clean, that perfect, there has to be something. Mr. Lewis, can I speak frankly? I've been doing this for 25 years, and in my experience, when a client is this determined to find dirt on someone who appears clean, it's usually because the client's judgment is being clouded by emotional factors rather than factual evidence. Are you saying you won't take the case? I'm saying I'll take it, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that the results will be the same as before. And I want you to think carefully about what you're really trying to accomplish here. 2 weeks later, Patricia delivered her report. 47 pages of investigation that confirmed everything Tommy had already found, and more. James Morrison wasn't just clean, he was practically saintly. His ex-girlfriend from college, Amanda Rodriguez, had nothing but positive things to say about him, Patricia reported. Even after their breakup, which was amicable and mutual, she described him as the most honest and loyal person I've ever known. What about his finances? Any hidden accounts, unexplained deposits? Nothing. His financial history is textbook middle-class American. Student loans, a modest checking account, a small 401k, even his credit card purchases are mundane. Groceries, gas, gym membership, Netflix subscription. The most extravagant thing he's bought in the past 2 years was a $300 watch for your daughter's birthday. I stared at the surveillance photos spread across Patricia's desk. James at work, James at the gym, James volunteering at the homeless shelter, James buying flowers for Sarah at a street vendor in Lincoln Road. There's something else, Patricia continued. I spoke to his supervisor at Goldman Sachs, off the record. James Morrison turned down a promotion last month that would have required him to relocate to New York. When asked why, he said he couldn't ask his fiancée to give up her life in Miami for his career advancement. He's planning to build his life around your daughter, Mr. Lewis, not the other way around. That should have been the end of it. That should have been the moment I realized I was wrong, that I called Sarah and apologized, that I begged for forgiveness and asked to be included in her wedding. Instead, I did something that I'm still ashamed of to this day. I decided to manufacture the evidence I couldn't find. 2 days before the wedding, I called Marcus Rivera, a former business associate who had always operated in the gray areas of Miami's real estate market. Marcus owed me several favors from deals I had helped him with over the years, and he had connections throughout the city's financial and social networks. Matthew, Marcus said when we met at a coffee shop in Coconut Grove, what you're asking me to do, this isn't just unethical, it's potentially illegal. I'm not asking you to break any laws, Marcus. I just need you to create a situation that will reveal James Morrison's true character. You want me to approach him with a fake business proposition, offer him money in exchange for information about your daughter and your family finances, and record his response. Exactly. If he's as honest as everyone thinks, he'll refuse and probably report the approach to Sarah or the authorities. But if he's been playing a long game, if he's really after my money, then this will be his chance to show his true colors. Marcus stared at me like I was a stranger. And if he refuses? If he proves he's exactly what he appears to be? Then I'll know I was wrong, and I'll find a way to make peace with my daughter. Matthew, we've known each other for 15 years. In all that time, I've never seen you this desperate. This isn't about protecting Sarah anymore, is it? This is about being right. He was right, and we both knew it. But I was too far gone to admit it. Will you help me or not? Marcus sighed and pulled out his phone. I'll do it. But Matthew, when this backfires, and it will backfire, don't expect me to help you pick up the pieces. The plan was simple. Marcus would approach James at his usual coffee shop near the Goldman Sachs building, pose as a potential client interested in investing in Miami real estate, and gradually steer the conversation towards Sarah and my family's finances. He would offer James a consulting fee for insider information about my investment patterns and upcoming deals. The meeting was scheduled for the morning before the wedding. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining different scenarios, James taking the bait and proving me right, or James refusing and proving that I had become the very monster Sarah accused me of being. At 6 a.m. on October 14th, my phone rang. It was Marcus. It's done, he said, his voice flat. And? Matthew, you need to call off whatever you're planning for tomorrow. You need to call your daughter and apologize, and you need to get some professional help. What happened? What did he say? I approached Morrison exactly as we planned. Casual conversation, gradual build-up, then the offer of money for information about your family. My heart was pounding. And? He looked at me like I had just asked him to sell his own mother. Then he said, and I quote, "Sir, I don't know who you are or what kind of person you think I am, but I would never betray Sarah's trust or her family's privacy for any amount of money. If you'll excuse me, I need to report this conversation to building security." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the marble floor of my study. I had my answer. James Morrison was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man who loved my daughter. And I had just proven that I was exactly what Sarah said I was, a paranoid, controlling father who trusted money more than love. But instead of accepting the truth, instead of calling Sarah and begging for forgiveness, I did something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I doubled down on my plan to crash the wedding. Because if I couldn't be the father who protected his daughter from a bad man, then I would be the father who saved her from making the biggest mistake of her life, even if that mistake was loving someone who was perfect for her. The next morning, October 15th, I woke up at dawn and put on my best suit. Navy blue Armani, the same one I had worn to Sarah's college graduation. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a stranger, a man so consumed by fear and control that he was about to destroy the last good thing in his life. But I was past the point of no return. As I drove through the early morning streets of Miami toward Vizcaya, I couldn't help but think about a question that had been haunting me for weeks. If you were Sarah, after everything I had put her through, after all the manipulation and suspicion and control, would you ever be able to forgive a father like me? What would you do in her place? Would you be able to forgive a parent who claimed to love you but destroyed your happiness in the name of protection? Let us know in the comments below. Vizcaya Museum and Gardens has always been one of Miami's most breathtaking venues, an Italian Renaissance-style villa overlooking Biscayne Bay, with manicured gardens that seem to transport you to another era. As I drove through the gates at 3:15 p.m., 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I couldn't help but admire Sarah's choice. It was elegant, sophisticated, and intimate, everything a wedding should be. Everything I was about to destroy. I parked my Mercedes behind a cluster of royal palms, far enough from the main entrance to avoid being spotted by early arriving guests, but close enough to have a clear view of the ceremony area. Through the ornate gardens, I could see workers making final preparations, adjusting white silk drapes, arranging massive bouquets of white orchids and roses, testing the sound system. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer, Robert Chen. "Matthew, I strongly advise you to reconsider whatever you're planning. This could have serious legal and personal consequences." I turned off my phone. At 3:45, the guests began arriving. I recognized some faces: James's parents, Dr. and Mrs. Richard Morrison, looking distinguished in their formal attire. Some of Sarah's colleagues from Morgan Stanley. A few distant relatives from my side of the family who apparently had been invited despite my absence. But it was the arrival of the wedding party that made my chest tighten with emotion. Sarah stepped out of a white Bentley Continental at exactly 4:10 p.m., 10 minutes after the ceremony was supposed to start. She was radiant in a simple but elegant ivory dress, not the elaborate gown I had imagined, but something more understated and classic. Her grandmother's pearl necklace caught the afternoon sunlight, and she carried a bouquet of white peonies and baby's breath. She looked beautiful. She looked happy. She looked like a woman in love on the most important day of her life. And I was about to ruin it all. I watched from behind a marble statue of Venus as Sarah made her way down the garden path, her maid of honor, her college roommate Jessica, not the Jessica from high school but a different one, adjusting her train. There was no father to walk her down the aisle, no traditional processional music, just Sarah moving gracefully toward the man she loved. James stood at the altar under a canopy of white silk and trailing jasmine, and even from my hidden position 50 yards away, I could see the emotion on his face as he watched Sarah approach. His eyes never left her, and when she reached him, he took her hands with such tenderness that I almost reconsidered what I was about to do. The officiant, a middle-aged woman in elegant robes, began the ceremony with words about love and trust and the courage it takes to build a life with another person. Her voice carried clearly across the gardens. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sarah Elizabeth Lewis and James Michael Morrison in holy matrimony." That's when I started walking. I moved through the gardens like a man possessed, my Italian leather shoes clicking against the stone pathways, my heart hammering against my ribs. Guests turned to look at me as I passed, first with curiosity, then with recognition, then with shock. "Matthew?" I heard someone whisper. "What is he doing here?" I reached the outer edge of the ceremony area just as the officiant was asking if anyone had reason why Sarah and James should not be wed. "I do," I said, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Sarah's face went white, then flushed red with humiliation and rage. James looked like he'd been slapped. The guests erupted in whispers and gasps. "Dad, no," Sarah said, her voice barely audible but somehow reaching me across the distance. "Please don't do this." But I was already committed to my course of destruction. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, walking closer to the altar, my voice strong despite my racing heart. "I apologize for interrupting this beautiful ceremony, but there are things about this union that my daughter doesn't know. Things that she needs to hear before she makes a decision that will affect the rest of her life." "Sir," the officiant said firmly, "this is highly irregular. If you have concerns, they should be addressed privately, not—" "There's no more time for privacy," I interrupted. "Sarah, I've spent the last month trying to protect you, trying to make you see the truth about what's happening here." "The truth?" Sarah stepped away from James and walked toward me, her wedding dress rustling against the garden stones. "The truth is that you're a sick, controlling man who can't stand to see his daughter happy. The truth is that I love you more than my own life, and I won't stand by and watch you make the same mistake your mother made." The words hung in the air like poison gas. I saw Sarah flinch as if I'd struck her, and I realized I had just revealed our family's darkest secret in front of 50 wedding guests. "What are you talking about?" James stepped forward, his face a mixture of confusion and anger. "What mistake? What does Sarah's mother have to do with anything?" And there it was, the moment of no return. I could stop now, apologize, retreat, and maybe salvage some tiny fragment of my relationship with my daughter. Or I could finish what I'd started and burn every bridge between us to the ground. I chose destruction. "Your mother married me for money, Sarah. For 30 years, she pretended to love me while she was actually in love with someone else, someone young and handsome and broke. She used me as a bank account while she lived her real life with another man." The gasps from the wedding guests were audible now. Someone's phone was recording. Sarah's maid of honor had her hand over her mouth in shock. "Dad, stop," Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop." "I won't stop. Because I see the same pattern here. James Morrison, with his perfect background and his perfect manners and his perfect answers to every question, he's too good to be true, Sarah. Nobody is that clean, that honest, that genuinely uninterested in $30 million. $30 million? James's voice cracked. What $30 million? Sarah turned to look at her fiancé, and I saw something break in her expression. I never told him about the inheritance, Dad. I never told him about any of it. Which makes him either the greatest actor in the world, or he's exactly who he says he is. Sarah screamed, her voice echoing off the villa's stone walls. Or he's a good man who loves me for me, not for what I might inherit someday. Or he's everything you can't understand because you've become so twisted by money and suspicion that you can't recognize genuine love when you see it. The wedding guests were frozen in place, like witnesses to a car accident who couldn't look away. James stood alone at the altar, his face cycling through shock, hurt, and something that looked like pity. "Mr. Lewis," James said quietly, and his voice somehow carried to every corner of the garden. "I don't know what I've done to make you think I'm not worthy of your daughter, but I want you to know something. I would marry Sarah if she was a waitress at Denny's with student loan debt and a broken-down car. I would marry her if she lived in a studio apartment in Hialeah and worked 3 jobs to pay rent. I would marry her if her father was the poorest man in Miami instead of, apparently, one of the richest." He turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with tears. "And if you want to call off this wedding because of what just happened, because of what you couldn't trust me enough to tell me, then I'll understand. But I want everyone here to know that I have never asked Sarah about her family's money, never expected anything from her except her love, and never will." The silence that followed was deafening. I realized that in trying to expose James as a fraud, I had instead revealed him to be exactly what Sarah believed he was, a man of genuine integrity who loved her unconditionally. And in that moment of absolute clarity, I understood what I had really done. I hadn't protected my daughter. I had destroyed her wedding day, humiliated her in front of her friends and family, revealed family secrets that should have stayed buried, and proven that I was everything she had accused me of being. I was the monster in this story. I was the one who couldn't be trusted. I was the one whose love came with conditions and suspicion and control. "Sarah," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But she was already walking away from me, away from the altar, away from James, away from everything. Her maid of honor hurried after her, and I could hear Sarah sobbing as she disappeared into the villa. James started to follow, then stopped and turned back to face me. "You know what the saddest part is, Mr. Lewis," he said, and there was no anger in his voice anymore, just profound sadness. "Sarah talks about you constantly. She loves you so much that losing your approval has been eating her alive for months. She would have given up the inheritance, the money, all of it, just to have her father at her wedding. And instead of seeing how much your daughter loves you, you saw enemies and threats and conspiracies that never existed." He straightened his tie and looked out over the ruined ceremony. "I'm going to go find my fiancée now and see if there's any way to salvage the most important day of her life. And you should go home and think about whether being right was worth losing the only family you have left." As James walked away, I stood alone in the garden, surrounded by 50 wedding guests who were staring at me with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The white silk drapes fluttered in the bay breeze, the orchids still perfumed the air, and somewhere in the distance, a string quartet was still playing soft classical music. But the wedding was over. My relationship with Sarah was over. And I had no one to blame but myself. The drive home from Vizcaya was the longest 20 minutes of my life. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I navigated through Miami traffic, my mind replaying the horror of what I had just done. Every red light gave me another moment to see Sarah's face, the shock, the humiliation, the heartbreak, burned into my memory like a brand. By the time I reached my penthouse, the story was already spreading through Miami's social circles like wildfire. My phone, which I had finally turned back on, was flooded with messages. Some from business associates expressing shock. Some from distant relatives asking if the rumors were true. And one from my lawyer that simply read, "We need to talk. Immediately." But it was the silence that hurt the most. No call from Sarah. No text. No voicemail filled with anger or tears or demands for explanation. Just nothing. I poured myself a scotch and stood on my balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay, the same view I had enjoyed for 15 years in this apartment that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. The sun was setting over Miami, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded me of the sunset on Sarah's 7th birthday, when I had taken her on a yacht cruise and she had fallen asleep in my lap while we watched dolphins play in our wake. When had I stopped being that father? When had I become this monster who destroyed the thing he claimed to love most? My phone rang at 9:47 p.m. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking it might be Sarah. Instead, it was James. "Mr. Lewis," his voice was steady but exhausted. "We need to talk." "James, Not over the phone. Meet me at the Mandarin Oriental lobby bar in 30 minutes. "And Mr. Lewis?" "Come alone." The Mandarin Oriental sits on Brickell Key like a glittering tower of glass and steel, its lobby bar overlooking the Miami skyline. When I arrived, James was already there, still wearing his wedding suit but with his tie loosened and his jacket draped over the chair beside him. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the span of 6 hours. "You came," he said as I approached his table. "Of course I came." "James, what I did today was unforgivable," he interrupted. "But I'm not here to listen to your apologies. I'm here because of Sarah." I sat down across from him, noting the way other patrons of the bar were glancing at us with recognition and whispering to their companions. The story of the crashed wedding was already becoming Miami gossip legend. "How is she?" I asked. "Devastated. Humiliated. Heartbroken." James signaled the bartender for another whiskey. "She's at her apartment, crying her eyes out while her maid of honor tries to convince her that the wedding can be salvaged tomorrow or next weekend or next month. But we both know it can't be salvaged, don't we, Mr. Lewis?" "Why not?" "You love each other. What I did doesn't change that." James laughed bitterly. "What you did revealed something that changes everything. You didn't just crash our wedding, you showed Sarah that she's been lying to me for our entire relationship. Every time I asked about her family, every time I wondered why her father seemed so cold toward me, every time I offered to help with expenses and she refused, she was keeping a massive secret from the man she claimed to want to spend her life with." The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. She was trying to protect your relationship. She wanted you to love her for herself, not for what she might inherit. And instead, she made me look like either an idiot or a gold digger to everyone at that wedding. Do you know what her cousin whispered to her friend while Sarah was crying in the bridal suite? "Poor James, finding out like this that he's marrying into money. Now everyone will think he's after her inheritance." I had never considered that perspective, that my revelation would cast suspicion on James's motives even after he had proven his integrity. "That's not fair to you," I said quietly. "No, it's not. But it's the reality now." James drained his whiskey and looked out at the Miami skyline. "Sarah and I spent 3 hours talking after you left. 3 hours of her crying and apologizing and trying to explain why she felt like she had to hide who her family really was. And you know what the worst part is?" I shook my head. "She's not angry at you anymore. She's angry at herself. She thinks this whole disaster is her fault for not trusting me with the truth about your wealth. She's convinced that if she had just been honest from the beginning, none of this would have happened. That's not true. This is my fault. All of it." "Is it, though?" James leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because here's what I can't figure out, Mr. Lewis. You spent months investigating me, trying to prove I was after your money. But Sarah spent 2 years hiding your money from me, trying to prove I wasn't. So which one of you actually trusted me less?" The question hung in the air between us like an accusation. I had never thought of it that way, that Sarah's secrecy might have been just as damaging as my suspicion. She was protecting herself, I said finally. She was protecting what you had together. By lying to me every single day. By letting me think her father was just some successful real estate guy instead of a multimillionaire. By making me feel guilty for not being able to afford the kind of restaurants or vacations that she was clearly used to. By never giving me the chance to prove that I could love her regardless of her family's wealth. James stood up and threw a $20 bill on the table. The wedding is off, Mr. Lewis. Not postponed, off. Sarah can't marry someone she doesn't trust enough to be honest with, and I can't marry someone who's been lying to me for 2 years, even if her reasons seemed good at the time. Wait, I said, reaching for his arm. Please wait. Don't let my mistakes destroy what you and Sarah have together. Don't let my paranoia and control issues ruin your future. Your paranoia didn't ruin our future, Mr. Lewis. Your paranoia revealed that we didn't have a future worth saving. He looked down at me with something that might have been pity. You want to know the irony? I was going to ask Sarah about the inheritance after our honeymoon. Not because I wanted access to it, but because I was planning to insist on a prenup to protect her from anyone who might question my motives. I wanted to make sure that everyone would know I married her for love, not money. He walked toward the elevator, then stopped and turned back one final time. You got exactly what you wanted, Mr. Lewis. You protected Sarah from marrying someone who might hurt her. Congratulations. You just destroyed your daughter's happiness to protect her from a man who would have spent his entire life making sure she was happy. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I sat alone in the Mandarin Oriental bar, surrounded by the glittering lights of the Miami skyline and the quiet conversations of couples who were probably discussing the scandalous scene they had witnessed or heard about that afternoon. I pulled out my phone and called Sarah's number. It went straight to voicemail. Sarah, it's Dad. I know you don't want to hear from me right now, but I need you to know something. James is a good man. A better man than I am, and a better man than I ever was. If you lose him because of what I did today, I will never forgive myself. Please, please don't let my mistakes cost you the love of your life. I'm begging you. I hung up and ordered another scotch, then another, and another, until the bartender gently suggested I might want to call a car service instead of driving home. As I waited for the Uber in the hotel lobby, I realized that I had achieved something remarkable in my 69 years of life. I had built a fortune worth $30 million, owned properties throughout Miami-Dade County, commanded respect in boardrooms across the Southeast, and wielded influence that most men could only dream of. And in the span of one afternoon, I had used all of that power and wealth and influence to destroy the only thing that actually mattered, my relationship with the daughter I loved more than life itself. The truly devastating part wasn't that I had lost Sarah. The truly devastating part was that I finally understood James was right. I had gotten exactly what I wanted. If this story is resonating with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramatic stories. Your support means everything to us, and we love reading your comments about how these stories impact your own life experiences. Don't forget to share your thoughts below. 6 months. 6 months since the wedding that never was, and Miami's social circles had moved on to fresher scandals. But the consequences of that October afternoon at Vizcaya continued to ripple through my life like aftershocks from an earthquake. I hadn't spoken to Sarah since that voicemail I left at the Mandarin Oriental. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts were never answered. When I tried to visit her apartment, Luis the doorman politely informed me that Miss Lewis had given strict instructions not to allow me upstairs. She moved out anyway, Mr. Lewis, he told me during my last attempt in December. About 3 weeks ago. Didn't leave a forwarding address. Through my remaining business connections, I learned fragments of what had happened to the people whose lives I had destroyed that day. James Morrison had requested a transfer to Goldman Sachs's London office and left Miami in January. Sarah had resigned from Morgan Stanley and, according to the few mutual acquaintances who would still speak to me, had taken a position with a non-profit organization somewhere on the West Coast. both of them had fled the city where their love story had begun and ended, carrying the scars of my paranoia with them to new lives and new places. As for me, I threw myself into what I knew best, making money. I closed the biggest real estate deal of my career in February, acquiring a portfolio of luxury condominiums in Aventura for $18 million. I expanded my holdings to include commercial properties in Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach. On paper, I was more successful than I had ever been. In reality, I was dying from the inside out. The money felt meaningless now. Every deal I closed, every property I acquired, every million I added to my net worth only reminded me of what I had sacrificed to build this empire. I would sit in my penthouse office, looking out at Biscayne Bay, and think about Sarah as a little girl, asking me to explain what I did for work. "You make buildings, Daddy," she had asked when she was 5. "I buy and sell buildings, sweetheart. I help people find places to live and work." "That sounds important. You must make a lot of people happy." When had I stopped making people happy? When had I started using my wealth as a weapon instead of a tool? The answer came to me on a rainy Thursday in March, when my lawyer Robert Chin called with news that changed everything. "Matthew, I've been contacted by Sarah's attorney. She's filed a petition to legally change her name." I felt the blood drain from my face. Change her name to what? Sarah Elizabeth Morrison. She's taking James's surname. But they're not married. They're not even together anymore. Apparently they are. The petition indicates they were married in a civil ceremony in Santa Barbara last month. Very small, very private. Just immediate family and a few close friends. The room spun around me. Sarah had married James after all, but without me there. Without any of the Miami family or friends who had witnessed our disaster at Vizcaya. They had started over completely, building a new life that deliberately excluded me. "There's more," Robert continued. "She's also filed paperwork to formally renounce any claim to your inheritance. She wants it legally documented that she has no interest in your estate, now or in the future." I hung up the phone and sat in silence for what felt like hours. Outside my window, a spring thunderstorm was lashing Miami with the kind of intensity that reminded me why I loved this city: dramatic, powerful, cleansing. Sarah had done exactly what she had threatened to do. She had chosen love over money, James over me, a new life over the toxic legacy I had tried to force on her. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt something that might have been pride. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since the wedding disaster. I called Tommy Restrepo. "Matthew," his gravelly voice was cautious. "I have to say, I'm surprised to hear from you after everything that happened. Tommy, I need you to do me one last favor. I need you to find Sarah and James." "Matthew, I can't help you stalk your daughter and her husband. That's crossing a line, even for me. I don't want you to stalk them. I want you to find them so I can send them something. Something they should have received 6 months ago." 2 weeks later, Tommy called me back with an address in Santa Barbara, California. Sarah and James had bought a small house in the hills overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sarah was working for an environmental nonprofit focused on marine conservation. James had taken a position with a boutique investment firm that specialized in sustainable energy projects. They were building the kind of life together that had nothing to do with Miami society or family money or the toxic legacy of suspicion that I had tried to pass down to another generation. I sat down at my desk and wrote the longest letter of my life. 12 pages, handwritten on my personal stationery, telling Sarah everything I should have said 6 months earlier. I apologized for the wedding disaster, for the years of suspicion and control, for letting my fear of losing her become a self-fulfilling prophecy that actually did lose her. But more than that, I told her how proud I was of the choices she had made. How proud I was that she had chosen trust over fear, love over money, hope over the cynicism that had consumed me. I told her about her mother, not the version I had revealed at the wedding, but the whole truth. How Catherine had been broken by her family's financial collapse, how she had married me not out of calculated greed but out of desperate fear of poverty, how the affair had been her way of trying to find some authentic happiness in a marriage that had begun as a transaction. I told her that I understood now why she had hidden the inheritance from James. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she had learned from my mistakes. She had seen what money could do to relationships, how wealth could poison love, and she had tried to protect what she had with James from the corruption that had destroyed everything else in our family. Most importantly, I told her that I was changing my will. The entire $30 million estate would be donated to charity upon my death, just as she had suggested. The Sarah Morrison Environmental Foundation, specifically, which I was establishing with an immediate endowment of $5 million to support her marine conservation work. I can't give you back the wedding day I ruined, I wrote in the letter's conclusion. I can't undo the pain I caused or the trust one betrayed. But I can give you something I should have given you years ago, my unconditional love and support, with no strings attached and no expectations in return. You don't need my money to be successful, and you don't need my approval to be happy. You never did. I'm sorry it took me 69 years to figure that out. I sealed the letter along with the legal documents establishing the foundation and a wedding gift I had been saving for 6 months, my mother's diamond bracelet, the one piece of family jewelry that had belonged to the Lewis family for 3 generations. 3 days later, I received a response. Not a letter, but a single photograph in the mail. Sarah and James on a beach in Santa Barbara, both of them tanned and smiling, Sarah's hand resting on what was clearly a small but growing baby bump. On the back of the photograph, in Sarah's familiar handwriting, were just 4 words, "Her name is Catherine." I sat in my study for a long time, holding that photograph and thinking about second chances. About redemption and forgiveness and the possibility that love might be stronger than the mistakes we make in its name. My granddaughter would be named Catherine, after the grandmother she would never meet but whose story had shaped all of our lives. And maybe, just maybe, this Catherine's story would be different. Maybe she would grow up in a family where love wasn't conditional on financial security, where trust was valued more than wealth, where parents protected their children by teaching them to choose well rather than by trying to control their choices. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had memorized but never called. Hello? Sarah's voice was different, softer, more mature, touched with the quiet confidence of a woman who had survived the worst her family could throw at her and come out stronger. Sarah, I said, my voice catching. It's Dad. I got your photograph. She's beautiful. A long pause, then, she's not born yet, Dad. That's just a sonogram picture. I know. But she's still beautiful. Just like her mother. Another pause, and I could hear the sound of ocean waves in the background. Dad, Sarah said finally, would you like to come visit us? Maybe it's time we talked. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in 6 months, maybe for the first time in years, I felt something that had nothing to do with money or business or the accumulation of wealth. I felt hope. 2 months later, I stood in the garden of Sarah and James's house in Santa Barbara, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah was 7 months pregnant now, glowing with the kind of happiness that money can't buy but that love can create. James and I had talked extensively during my week-long visit. We would never be close, too much damage had been done for that, but we had reached a kind of peace. He understood that my actions had come from love, however twisted, and I understood that his forgiveness was a gift I hadn't earned but desperately needed. She's kicking, Sarah said, placing my hand on her belly. I think she knows her grandfather is here. As I felt my granddaughter move under my palm, I thought about the inheritance I was leaving behind. Not $30 million in real estate and investments, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that love is worth more than wealth, that trust is more precious than control, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to make their own choices, even when those choices break your heart. Catherine Lewis Morrison would grow up knowing she was loved unconditionally. She would never doubt that her parents' marriage was built on genuine affection rather than financial calculation. She would never have to hide who her family was or worry that her grandfather's money would corrupt the relationships she built. She would be free in a way that Sarah never was, and Sarah never was because I never was. And that, I realized, was the only inheritance worth leaving behind. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart or made you think about your own family relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? We love hearing your stories and experiences. Until next time, remember that the most valuable things in life can't be bought, only earned through love, trust, and the courage to put relationships above everything else.